Okay, we're recording and everyone is okay with this being recorded and to be posted unedited online. So welcome. This is our empathy circle to address foundationally Adrian's conflicts in the NVC A, B, etc. groups. That's the nonviolent communication groups. And also to talk about whatever's alive for everyone. And this has been a part of a series of empathy circles to address kind of stuff that's been happening in the NVCA group. I had previously done a series of pre-circles with Adrian and some other people in the group, 4 others who have not shown up for this empathy circle. And also there's been an invitation to the administrators and to other people in the group, and none of them have shown up. So just wanted to make that clear. Everyone was invited. I just want to start with sharing my intention. I don't know if it's your guys' intention or not, but my intention for holding this is, let me just read this here, is for this empathy circle is to build a culture of empathy. And that means to nurture mutual listening, understanding, care, and trust and support, and create a constructive relationship going forward. And also for each person to be able to feel that they can fully express themselves in any way that they want, totally free to express yourself the way you would like to, and to feel heard and understood to your satisfaction. We use mutual empathic listening as the practice where one person will speak, they will select who they speak to, that the listener will reflect back their understanding of what the speaker said to the speaker's satisfaction that they've been heard and understood. We'll have 5-minute turns to begin with. And then once the speaker is felt heard, it'll become the listener's turn to select who they want to speak to, and we will continue for the time allotted, and we have 2 hours for that. And I almost forgot, I get to try my new candle. This is just as a reminder of the empathy circle, of the intention to build a culture of empathy. So I will turn that on, magically turned on. My new remote, very excited about that. Save on candles, wax. So, and it even has a little flicker to it too, if you notice, so it's very nice. So that's just holding our intention. And so we're open, I'll keep time, and I have a time, here. We can always extend time later if need be. We need more time. So who would like to start? Who would you like to speak to? And for the instructions on how to do this, you can always go to empathycircle.com, and there's extensive introduction how to do this process and training video and stuff, just in case you're kind of wondering how the process works. So who would like to start?
Yeah, I think I'd like to start because I think the initial conflict was about me.
And who are you speaking to?
I'm speaking to Edwin.
Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's just like, my background is I've been for 8 years in my life in a left-wing Marxist, Maoist cult. And the goal of my cult was to provoke a civil war to take over control of the state. And I think that's my background. And so I'm pretty triggered by some topics like radical feminism, or I've also been really triggered with this, I'd call this wokeness culture. It's like.
Okay, well, let me reflect that back. So what I'm hearing is that you were for 8 years in a Maoist, or what you would call a cult, political cult, and that you get really triggered when you hear about the feminism and the woke culture. And you're also wanting to start talking because this is, that you feel this conflict was, related to your experience, so.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm triggered by feminism as a whole, because initial feminism was just about having equal rights. But I don't know, some call it third wave feminism or radical feminism. But it's like a worldview where you see everything evil in man and everything good in evil in women. Or there are many kinds of this black and white thinking of good, bad. You can have everything good can be black and everything bad can be white, but it can also be the opposite. So you can also name everything bad about black people and everything good about white people. We did have this in history, and for me it's just all the same. It's just a dangerous black or white thinking which alienates us from each other and from reality.
Okay, so what I'm hearing there is it's not feminism per se, but maybe third wave feminism and a feminism and also a way of thinking that just sees black and white, right and wrong, and you're right or you're wrong kind of thinking. And it's an ongoing historical kind of thing that just happens with.
Yeah, I think it's just, I mean, you have so many different ideologies, and I believe every ideology has its good points. I think all ideologies strive for a society where we can live in trust and harmony with each other. But a healthy community is just in these notions that the means define the ends. And I think a non-healthy community is into this mindset of the means justify the ends. So they promote violence and shaming and shunning and blaming others because they think, hey, we're the good ones. So if everybody just submits to our ideology, everything will be fine.
So you're saying that there's sort of two ways of thinking. The means sort of are the ends versus the means justifies the ends. And if you're coming from a means justifies the ends, whatever action you do, whatever violence, whatever shaming, blaming, etc. that you do is justified. And so it sounds like you're supporting the sort of the means are the end approach.
Yeah, I'm. That's out of my experiences. I've been an asshole for the best reasons I can imagine, but it really doesn't. It really doesn't matter what the reasons are you are doing certain things, but just because the impact, if you're violent, if you're blaming or whatever, is always a bad one.
Yeah, so if you've been you're kind of speaking for yourself, you've been an asshole for the best of reasons, you had good intentions, but yeah, you're just, so you've just had that experience of being of doing that yourself. And that was the time too, so. Did I kind of get that last part? Just want to be sure I got all of it, but it is time, just if you want to wrap up.
Okay.
Okay, well, then I'll speak to James. Yeah, so this is an interesting group, the three of us. So we're all people who have been sort of banned or whatever from some of these NVC groups. And so it's interesting that it's us who show up and none of the facilitators, none of the participants in those groups show up to have an empathic dialogue.
Yeah, you think that it's significant that it's the people who are banned who are willing to show up, not the ones who do the banning or administer the groups.
Yeah, so when I saw what was going on with Adrian in those groups, NVCA, B, etc., and it was just like these groups are supposed to be about empathy, about nonviolence. And I thought, well, why for, the last year is nobody just holding an empathy circle? Why is nobody just talking to each other? It's like, and then somebody asked me, Barbara said, oh, would you be willing to facilitate? And I said, okay, I'm willing to, facilitate because, and I thought, yeah, I'll facilitate, we'll just set up some constructive empathy circles and life will be great,
Yeah, so for the last year, you've been wondering why people don't set up an empathy circle if they're having some conflict. That could be a way to at least get some dialogue started. And a member of the group, Barbara, then called on you and asked you to do it. And you thought, yeah, okay, let's try it.
Yeah, and I thought, well, we'll model it like we're doing here. Others can watch it. They can see, oh, people are really listening to each other. There's some kind of connection and mutual understanding being made. You know, every voice, you can say whatever you want. You're not restricted, no political correctness. And it's like, whoa, you know, I kind of started the process and then I got censored, banned, and, you know, excommunicated from those groups. It's like, whoa, these groups, it says public empathy, come get your public empathy. And I offer public empathy, and it's like, what the heck is going on here?
So the groups describe themselves as being nonviolent and being centered around offering empathy or learning the practice of empathy. And as soon as you started offering a space for people to be heard and to hear others, you had a lashback. That
yeah, it's being censored and banned from the group, where I was like kicked out of the group, one group totally, the other for a couple of weeks, then I get reinstated, then I post and I get banned again for a couple of weeks. So so that's just
censored, totally removed from one group, restricted posting in another, then kind of back and forth where you post again, then restricted again. And so a whole maze to navigate in order to just offer people a space to be heard.
And with the intention, the criticism was that these groups are public, right? This is recorded, we start, we stop at the end, and we just post it as is. And somehow this openness, this transparency is dangerous. Mm-hmm. It's like there's people who are vulnerable, who if they get into this, they might reveal something, you know. But then all the posts are the judgments, the criticisms, the demeaning, the calling Adrian racism, all that is okay to be public. But then to have a mutually empathic dialogue is like, you know, it's like taboo. And not only is it taboo, but the people in those groups are saying, oh, let's talk about empathy, they won't show up.
So the initial criticism directed at you about having this meeting is that it's public, it's recorded, posted, unedited, and that the criticism is that there's a danger in having that level of transparency. But on the other hand, those groups are public. People are judging, criticizing, calling Adrian a racist, and all of that is public as well. And somehow that there's no criticism of that. And so,
it's all weird. So it's interesting. And so the second part for holding this one is Adrian. I've done 2 pre-circles with him because he's had conflict in the Extinction Rebellion groups too. In Switzerland, I think he's been kicked out of those groups. And so I did a pre-circle there, pre-circle here. And we've never done an empathy circle together where he's done mutual listening. So I did really want to have him be in this circle to just, you know, to model and demonstrate mutual empathic listening.
So the priority for this circle is in particular having a mutually empathic space to participate with Adrian, because you've done calls before that were pre-circles for Extinction Rebellion and Adrian or other conflicts, but never an empathy circle.
That's my time. Thanks.
Adrian, would you listen to me?
Yes.
Okay. So the political philosophy that you were referencing before regarding feminism or racism, that's what I would call an essentialist perspective. It's a belief that people have an essential quality, being a man, being a Black person, being a white person. There's an essential quality that then determines everything about them.
So the ideologies you mentioned, you group these ideologies in an essential ideology. where they take traits like gender or race and kind of explain everything from that point of view.
I reject that way of viewing the world. And I'm nobody, but Adolf Reed is a well-known Marxist leftist, and he rejects essentialism. And so it's important for me to distinguish these two tendencies within a group that calls themselves the left. Because if we just say the left is all essentialist, that's not true. And if we say all the left focuses more on class, like Adolf Reed does, that's also not true. So there's a division in the left that is important for our discussion.
Yeah, and you're really concerned about these terms like left or Marxist because you know a Marxist scholar who also opposes essentialisms and puts class as main category in focus instead of.
Yes. And so recently there's been a lot of violent protests, what people would call rioting, going on in the US. I just saw an article about people throwing burning material into an apartment building in Portland, Oregon. And so the protest was shut down and classified as a riot. And so there's discussions going on now online where I see people who call themselves leftists actually arguing in favor of looting and rioting, and saying that even to criticize looting and rioting is racist because it is a way of criticizing protesters, Black Lives Matter protesters.
Yeah, and in your country there are protests going on which are also turning to violent riots, and there's always been there has also been an incident where somebody threw something which burned into a private apartment. And now you see on online discussions that there are people who say if you criticize this violence going on, you're a racist because you criticize the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah. Maybe it's suffice to say, all of this subtlety and these subtleties and distinctions have no place in the NVC discussion groups online, because for the reasons that Edwin has already said, there's, I've seen that Ray Taylor has said, anything that even looks like a right-wing comment, and Ray is the one who decides what a right-wing comment is considered racist and will be deleted. And that's the justification, I suppose, for what Adrian, for Adrian being censored in some way. I don't know the details of how he was censored.
And you observe in the NVC forum that there's no place for the subtleties to distinct between leftist and other leftist ideas. And it's just Ray Taylor, the admin, which somehow decides what's a right opinion and what's a left opinion. And he seems to be having like a norm, putting a norm on this room, where left-wing ideas, according to Ray Taylor, are allowed and other things are just bad.
Supposed left-wing ideas. It's not the part of the left that I consider myself of. It's the essentialist left. That's the only idea that's permitted, and that's my time.
Yeah, you see, it's not only the leftist ideas, but it's this part, this essentialist part, which you deny, which he refers to, and not at all at this other leftist position, like focusing on class.
Yeah.
I'd like Edwin to listen.
Okay, listening.
I think I'm somehow sad and somehow afraid because it's so overwhelming what's going on, and I think when I, especially when I read the comments from the United States, it's like, for me, it's just war propaganda. I think more coming from Democrats than from Republicans, but it's maybe just my bubble, which I've been drawn into.
So you're just feeling some sadness because you just see the kind of the war mindset that's coming, you think, more from the Democrats than the Republicans, but maybe that's just your own bubble that you're from.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I also had this, what James would call essentialism, what I would call cult-like. I also had the same discussion inside of Extinction Rebellion, that I mean, there's this tolerance paradox, which says if you're tolerant with the intolerant will win. So I mean, even that is just twisted around by the leftists, because they say the leftists are the tolerant and the right wing are the intolerant. But in the usual meaning of that, it's just, if you don't stop violence, if you're tolerant with violence and shunning and blaming and shaming, then the ones which use violence, they are just in favor and will win. And yeah, and it seems that there's an epidemic of that.
So in the XR group, that you're just seeing sort of a philosophy there that says you can't have to be intolerant of blaming, shaming, and violence, but that they sort of use it themselves, that you're justified to use that to fight it. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but
yeah, you didn't get me right. It's just that the tolerance paradox is, if you're tolerant with the intolerant. So if you're tolerant with those people promoting violence, justifying violence. So if you got a room of, let's say, us three, and I just say, hi, Adrian, you know, I strongly support using violence to, I strongly support violence to punish others, and I'm really well organized. So I have people around the world which are using violence, and I'll use that against anyone which will not share my point of view. So when I tell something like this, then you start to be afraid of saying anything wrong, because you know, oh, there's this violent guy and he's showing really his willingness to use violence.
Okay, so there's, let me take the points individually. So there's this tolerance paradox that if you are tolerant to people who are violent, then the violence wins. So example, you're being violent, then I would become intimidated, and then even though I'm tolerant, I would become intimidated. And
yes, and I think that's why I oppose those things. And I think there's this really, physical violence is really not easy to detect. But other things like psychological violence or just defamation. So when I say, hey, I'll call you a racist if you're opposing my view, it's also the kind of violence, or I mean, there's many ways. I could call you're unempathic. I think it really depends on which is seen as a positive trait in a society. So I could say, yeah.
So it's that, I don't know, my brain is not working here very well, but you're the, boy, I don't know, so can you just say that again, the very, very short, that
bullying is effective if no one opposes bullying.
Okay, so bullying works if people don't oppose bullying.
Yeah, or if you can't control the bullies will control you.
So if you can't control bullying, the bullies are going to control you, and so that's kind of like the core of what you're saying. So, okay, well, that was the time, and I'll speak back to you then. I wish we had a fourth person, because it always helps mix things up a little bit. Yeah, I know you're both talking about leftists. I've left the left and left the right. I think there's a third option, which is empathy, the culture of empathy. And so that's kind of the starting point that I come from. And kind of what we're doing right here and right now is that culture of empathy. So I'm speaking back to you, Adrian.
So you see us thinking in these opposing views of left and right, and you think there's also a third way, and there's this culture of empathy that we connect to each other in an empathic way.
Yeah, and that we're actually doing it. We're sort of modeling it here. We're slowing down. We're fully listening to each other. And that sort of models it. It doesn't matter if you're left or right or different parts of the left, that you're willing to have an empathic dialogue to listen with each other. So I see that as an alternative to what I see on both the left and right, that neither the left or the right are really supporting that kind of full-heartedly. I mean, everybody's a little bit empathic to one degree or another, but there's not a full throated, a full, value of that on either side. In general, I'm kind of generalizing.
So what I understand, you really believe in being in the here and now and doing what we want. And if we want more empathy, we just should train it in the here and now. And we can do it all the time. And you don't, neither in the left nor the right, you see very much of this practice of empathy being done.
Yeah, so with the XR, the groups you were part of there, ideally it would be, they would say, oh, we got a problem with you, you're objecting to something, let's have an empathy circle to talk about it. We want to hear what you have to say, we want you to feel fully heard, but then you would also listen to, what I have to say and fully hear me, and we just keep going till we kind of work it out.
So, and you really wish groups like XR that then when a conflict arises, that the group spirit is that people embrace that moment as an opportunity to train empathy and just do a circle.
Yeah, and I don't have I do sense your sort of depression around it, or I don't know, pain or hopelessness. I don't have that. I feel pretty optimistic, just by doing all these empathy circles, talking to people, it feels pretty good, and I feel really, confident and grounded that it works if we can get people into the empathy circle. And they got so many excuses for not coming into a dialogue. It's amazing the amount of excuses people have for not sitting down and talking.
And you also think if we are in another field than in a field of empathy, that can make you pretty hopeless and depressed. And from your experience, just joining these empathy circles and just being alive in this culture is really a really beautiful place to be, and you wish everyone to join this place.
Yeah, and it's like the thing is, you kind of have to let go of what's right and wrong and what the political strategies are, that the strategies have to sort of emerge. Like, I don't know what the best political way forward is, except that people have to be able to talk with each other about it and kind of come up with some kind of, shared solutions.
And you think it's really important that we have like a hierarchy of that empathy is having empathy and having listening to each other is something more important than what we personally view as the right view.
Yeah, and we can hold our right and wrong, whatever views we have, and share them, but do it within a space, an empathic space, and we have to take the time for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's okay if we have different opinion. If we do that, we don't lose our own opinions. We can just stay with them, but we also have this room where we can share it, and this empathy received also.
I feel fully heard. Thanks.
Yeah, I believe you also mentioned.
Who are you speaking to?
To James. From my experience, it's now with the group and also with Extinction Rebellion is that I in both places, I just want to express myself, and I believe I did it really non-violently. I didn't say I'm right and others are wrong. I just told my truth, and some people were triggered by it and wanted to shut me down, to censor me, to shun me, to kick me out. And those people doing that were exactly the ones which were never able to join an empathy circle with me.
So for you, you've just wanted to express yourself. You did that, and then it triggered people. People reacted to it and wanted to remove you, and those are the exact people who would never join an empathy circle.
And so, I mean, I also started this Facebook group of nonviolent communities because it's also for me a space to think about how we react. But I actually believe that a nonviolent group has to get rid of people refusing to join an empathy circle, or people refusing to let go of a conflict by talking badly about other people. So people who keep their conflict by talking badly about other persons, but which aren't willing for a direct conversation with those people they have the conflict about. I think they're really toxic to a group environment.
So you started a Facebook group called Nonviolent Communities, and you're talking a bit about your philosophy around how groups can be functional. And you're saying that there are some people who will talk about a conflict or talk about a person and not let go of that conflict or their judgments of that person, but also not have a willingness. They won't let go of the judgments and they won't engage directly with the person. And you think it makes sense, it's necessary to remove those people from a nonviolent community.
Yeah, to remove those people, or just to have strong boundaries that it's not okay to spread distrust or rumors about a person when you're not willing to talk directly to this person.
So you say it's not okay to spread rumors or talk badly about someone if you're not willing to talk directly to them.
And I think it's really toxic, because it just I think that a conflict can be transformed into something life-serving. There needs to be some way to connect with each other.
So doing the talking about people and avoiding them is toxic, and the opposite would be engaging, and you see that that has a lot of transformative potential.
Yeah, and I think the opposite of this oppression system, or the oppression system, oppression cultures are, in oppression cultures, you have safety through punishment, through exclusion, through blaming, through violence. And I think the other way to safety, which I believe is far more powerful, is to have safety through trust and connection. So I think we can feel safe in a society which has a maximum of connection to each other.
So these oppressive ideologies talk about safety, but you think that the best way to actually create safety is through connection, and trust is built through the maximum amount of connection.
And I think I think real connection is only possible if we are connected on the basis of our feelings and needs, if we are connected with our vulnerability. And I think the opposite of being connected to our feelings and needs is just that we're not connected to them, but in some kind of good or bad ideology.
So real connection happens at the level of feeling and needs, and disconnection or fake connection happens through ideology, connecting on or disagreeing on ideology.
So I think people which aren't able to be, I think it's really, if we want to have a healthy community, each and everyone has to support connection and really fight everything which stands in the way of connection. I think we really have to be arbitrary in favor of those willing to connect. And I think it's really important that we somehow judge those people not willing to connect as dysfunctional.
Now it's time to
You'd like to judge people who are not willing to connect as dysfunctional or creating dysfunction. Okay. Edwin, would you listen to me?
listening.
So there's two examples that I'd like to address around connection and oppression dialogue. One is Adrian's group. Adrian and I had a conflict, maybe still in conflict, about some of the things that he mentioned. And so I see it differently. I do think it's problematic if people are not willing to connect, but I also see that we can't force people to come to the table, and that the harder we try, the more people will naturally resist because they want the freedom to choose, and that's reasonable.
Mm-hmm. So you're sort of disagreeing a bit with Adrian, and part of that is saying that you can't force people to come to the table, because when you try to force them, they kind of want their freedom to choose.
Yeah, and I've tried to experiment with a way to practice that in a Facebook group with the particular way a Facebook group is set up, which is to let somebody be the kind of the you know, to determine how a thread, when they post a thread, how the thread works. And so Adrian and I got into a disagreement about my thread in his group. I asked him to please not post in my thread because he was coming in there and posting in a way that I didn't like. And so he removed me for 24 hours and I haven't posted in his group since.
Mm-hmm. So you posted a thread in his group, and then he posted in your group, I guess, on a different topic, and you asked him not to do that, but did he actually banned you or censored, banned you,
Removed me for 24 hours.
Removed you for 24 hours, yeah. And you haven't gone back to that group.
Yeah. What Adrian wanted, I think, was he wanted me, because I said that Dominic Barter is full of shit, and I was talking about some of the things that Dominic Barter was doing, and I think Adrian took issue with that. Like he said, he doesn't want people spreading rumors or talking bad about people. And he said he wanted me to delete the comment about Dominic Barter, and I said, absolutely not. This is what I'm bringing to this thread. I want to talk about the problem that I see with what Dominic Barter is doing. And I had posted plenty of stuff, you know, many things about what Dominic Barter was doing. It was just that one line, Dominic Barter is full of shit, he wanted me to edit out. And I felt in his role as administrator of the group, it felt heavy-handed. I didn't want somebody coming in and micromanaging my thread.
Mm-hmm. So you posted kind of one line, you posted a lot in the group, and you posted one line saying Dominic Barter is full of shit. And then Adrian wanted you to delete that, and you didn't want to delete it.
Yeah.
You just, yeah.
And this is a great example, I think, of like how we can get into trouble around trying to force people to speak in a certain way. Because I'll agree that saying somebody's full of shit is not the best and most effective way to talk. But neither is controlling the way other people talk. So there's a conflict around there. And then in that context, there was a power difference. Adrian had the ability to remove me, and I don't have the ability to remove him. And so if it comes down to that and then force is used to silence me, I don't want to go back in. I don't want to have to navigate that around force. I want to navigate it around the words.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you posted that. Adrian wanted you to delete it. You didn't want to delete it, and then you wanted to have sort of a dialogue about it, and you actually agree it's not the best thing. It's kind of judgmental. Maybe you didn't use that word, but to say he's full of shit, but then that's sort of maybe seen as a problem. But also using the power to ban you or delete it is also, in a sense, it's like saying that it was judgmental is kind of unempathic in some sense, but then the power over was unempathic as well. Yeah, and so I don't know if I'm putting words in your mouth.
No,
that
you got me.
it.
And maybe this is useful to discuss further. I also would like to specifically discuss what I see Dominic Barter doing right now that is very problematic. And it's a great example of what I don't want to have happening in a group that is empathic and that engages with dialogue. So that's my time.
Yeah, so you're wanting to, you're saying that what Dominic is doing is being unempathic in his group. And that you're kind of thinking of like discussing, do you want to kind of talk about those details?
I definitely do, yes, thank you.
Okay, all right, then I'll speak back to you.
To me.
Yeah, to you, James. So, yeah, this is like, these dynamics, how to deal with them is a real question. What I've been looking at is when you do have a group, have a sort of an agreement that if you join this group, this is the basic agreement. And the agreement is that we're willing to take any kind of conflict into an empathy circle. So that's kind of one way. And it's kind of, I'd like to scale that up to become a social norm. Yeah, so.
Yeah, so you'd like to suggest as a way of dealing with these kinds of frictions for groups to agree that if they arise, people agree to come together in an empathy circle.
Yeah, so if there's that little conflict come up, Adrian doesn't like, using the shit term, your favorite term, full of shit. This person, you're full of shit, you're full of shit, oh, you're full of shit. So it's one of your favorite terms, right? So it's like, it's like, then you say, let's have an empathy circle about it, right? It's really hard to do it all in text, but there's a willingness to, let's have an empathic dialogue about it. It's going to be recorded. We're going to post it, under the comments to kind of, yeah, so.
Yeah. Yeah, saying people are full of shit is kind of like my thing. I say it, but if it comes up, you want, to have people come to a place where they talk about it.
Yeah, but having an agreement in advance that you join this group, shit's gonna happen, to use your term. And if it happens, we're gonna have an empathic dialogue. Do you agree to this or not? Then if you don't agree, then this is probably not the group for you to join, That's sort of our foundational. And when you come into the empathy circle, say whatever you want. Say Dominic Barter's full of shit. Say I'm full of shit. Say everybody's full of shit. It is totally fine. But then when somebody speaks back to you, be willing to reflect that to their satisfaction too.
Yeah, so the agreement for groups that you're suggesting is that people have a space where they do the empathic practice, and then in that space, like this space, you can say whatever you want. And it's important in order to create that space that people who come there have a willingness to then reflect back what other people are saying to their satisfaction.
And that's sort of what I was hoping to create in NVCA. I thought, oh, look at you guys are just as dysfunctional here. If you implemented empathy circles, had a weekly empathy circle, a space for people to air their grievances or whatever, it's going to really create a better foundation for this group. And plus it's going to be consistent with what the intention of the group is too. So that's why I actually was willing to, take on the role of, facilitating that. And I wanted to have it publicly recorded so we could have a public demonstration of it, a model to show how it actually works. Because people watch these circles and they learn by observation, it's like, so that was my intention for in that group.
Your intention for working with the NVCA group is to create a space where people can do this work, practice it, record it, so that people who watch it can then learn. I think I may have missed something.
That's the essence of it. And then it's like, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect that's a issue for me is like, it's like with Adrian trying to, address these issues with XR. And I try to do the same thing with the political left and the right. And I keep coming up with this avoidance. It's like that avoidance is so thick within the culture that, and it's a power, it's like a tool of power that we will avoid you, we will shun you, we will censor you, but we'll do everything except sit down and have an empathic dialogue with you. And it's rampant on the political left too. I see that.
So with Adrian's situation in Extinction Rebellion and just rampant throughout the left is this massive practice of avoidance. And it's like monolithic. It's used as a weapon. It's used to shun people. It's used to control the narrative and the dynamic, just this avoidance and refusal to dialogue.
And it seems to be part and parcel of the culture in general. It seems to be, part of the culture. So I think that is really what we're up against. And the alternative to that is what we're doing here is this empathic willingness to dialogue.
You see it as embedded, this avoidance issue is embedded in the culture. And what we're doing here is addressing that by showing up for dialogue.
Yeah, I feel fully heard. Oh, yeah. And the other thing is how to address that. It's like, I see it as the problem. We can create a group and have an agreement that we'll do empathy circles, but how do we really transform society and transform this avoidance? I guess that's the core.
Yeah, so you see the problem, but you're wondering what the systemic solution is, because we are doing it on a personal level, but what is the scaled up systemic solution for helping the culture manage its avoidance issues?
Yeah, I feel heard.
Okay, I'd like to talk back to you, Edwin.
Okay, listening.
Restorative Circles Facebook group has a severe avoidance problem. I've been posting there for 2 years, and mostly people there have been completely avoiding my posts. Dominic Barter came in like, they say like Errol Flynn, like on a rope. He swings into the pirate ship. He came in, he dropped his proposal, he appointed 5 admins. The current admin there jumped to it, made all of these changes against my objection. I said, stop, I object, don't do this. If you're gonna run this group by consensus, you need to have a discussion with me about it. They totally ignored me. They restructured, they put people in under Dominic's direction as admins, and then created 3 separate groups. 2 of these groups are where you're supposed to bring conflict, and they're private. And I strongly objected. I said, no, I've been constantly brought into secret rooms, private rooms, told to scream into pillows, talk into pillows. I want to have a public dialogue. Dominic, I've been inviting you to a public dialogue. You're kind of postponing it. And with all the people in this group, I wanted to have a public dialogue. And now you're reordering everything. Basically, in an election metaphor, it's like you decide who the next president is, and then you direct people to the voting booths, right? Now that they've changed the whole structure of the group, Dominic says, well, if you want to talk about it, you can go do it in this private group. Totally undemocratic. And that happened 2 weeks ago, and I have been posting and posting in the group, no response. No one will engage with me. Dominic will not engage with me on all of my criticisms about what he just did.
Mm-hmm. So in the RC Restorative Circles group, Dominic came in, made some changes, just kind of pushed them through. You had some objections to what was happening, and you've pretty much just been ignored, and it's just, and there's like no dialogue, nobody's willing to engage, and they're just kind of pushing these changes through. And also, you've been wanting to do having public discussions, and they're not willing to do public discussions. They're creating kind of these private groups, and the stuff happens, any conflict happens in this private. And even the private conflict group that he set up, it's not a place to just post about your conflict. It's a place to go and make an arrangement with the person you're in conflict with. And so if that person disagrees, then there's no space for the conflict. So it's this kind of like Russian doll, like the place for conflict, you're always opening up a new doll, like where's the place for conflict? Where? And it never appears. And in this case, I mean, Dominic is totally avoiding me. There's a researcher who's very critical of restorative circles who I've been talking to, and I invited him into the group, and he started posting, and Dominic started replying to him immediately. But he said, look at what you're doing. You're setting the situation up where you're just ostracizing James. You're not responding to any of his criticisms. And again, there's just a wall of silence and avoidance of my comments. So there's just this ongoing, sounds like you're really frustrated because there's this wall of silence and avoidance and there's like no space for sort of a public conflict, or even or real conflict, because you kind of go through this layer. The conflict is hidden, is under layer after layer of sort of structure or organization, and there's no space. And it's like, and then if you try to bring it out in public, you're just kind of ignored. And it's,
Yeah.
you also have some other critic who is critical of, and he's even, or they are even addressing that, saying, "Oh, you're talking to me, but you're not talking to James."
Yeah. And so it's just like you said, I totally agree with what your last share, which is that it is a fundamental cultural issue around avoidance being like a core way to deal with issues. And you know, having a space for conflict is meaningless if people are not willing to show up to that space, like it is here, like it is there. And excuse, I would just want to correct it. It's not that it's totally meaningless, because us showing up here has a lot of meaning, and me making my criticisms has a lot of meaning. But of course, there would be more that could be done if there was some engagement or more engagement with the ideas that we're bringing to the table.
Yeah, so there is meaning being created here in this group, as well as when you post something that has a meaning to it, but it could be a deeper meaning if there was sort of a mutual engagement around that.
Yeah, and I'll just end, I'll end just by saying, to their credit, they have not deleted me, but it's still problematic, and ignoring and not engaging, you're on the road to deleting someone if there's no engagement. So
yeah, there's just kind of a spectrum, you know. You just you can delete somebody, ban something, or you can just sort of ignore them, and it's a sort of a road or a spectrum that you can go down, and it starts maybe with ignoring.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and speak to Adrian. You're muted. Yeah, so, you know, I appreciate the stuff that you've brought up about XR, you know, and I've appreciated both of you more and more as I kind of get into this, just that, you know, that you're pointing out issues specific, you know, more with the political left, kind of this community that, you know, that is not being seen. So I think it's, yeah, I appreciate just, you know, your voice there.
Yeah. As well, my voice as the voice of change, you really appreciate, because we bring focus to topics which aren't addressed otherwise.
And I do think that the thing, though, is like in XR or even NVCA, is to make the issue of an empathic dialogue in an empathy circle or whatever empathic dialogue, that's the first step. Like you get a problem, and then you say, I would like, and I've been doing that with, you know, Ray, is I've always said all I want was a dialogue. Let's have an empathic dialogue. And he says, no. You know, you're terrible. You're horrible. I'm unfriending you. I'm banning you. I'm censoring you. You know, what you're doing is really bad. And I just say, well, come and let's have an empathic dialogue. I will listen and share, you know, listen to you to your satisfaction. So I think that's the first step. I think that's sort of been missing from what you've been doing with XR, is from the get-go say, I would like a mutually empathic dialogue.
Yeah, you think that there would be a huge benefit for, as well as XR, as for the NVCA group, if people just would join these empathic circles and to just build up at this as a core value of a group culture.
And that it's kind of was missing from what I was seeing. You were sort of willing to talk, but you didn't put it front and center to them, you know, that I know of. That I think it would have just helped with your case. Or
I think in the conflict of XR especially, you feel a bit sad because you haven't observed me fully putting this number one focus of wanting a dialogue. and you believe that would be a more efficient way to deal with the conflict.
Yeah, it puts you, I don't know what the word is, if it's on the moral high ground. I'm not quite happy with that term. It's kind of the solution. You're advocating for what I think is the real solution, and doing it strongly, and yeah. So I'm not quite sure what the term is, but it's advocating, clearly, strongly for what I just see is the solution. And I think what you're really advocating for, but it would be just clearer.
You believe that we really have to be cautious to come with really clear views how things should be, because this kind of energy can be overwhelming pretty fast for others, and just destroy or destroy the energy to get into contact with each other.
Yeah, and I do think now I see all these barriers, all this avoidance, and like how to address it. And I've talked with James about this before with the civil rights movement. There's this whole power structure that blacks couldn't in the South, couldn't vote, couldn't sit at the lunch counter. So there is all this control, and the way to address it was to take action. So, and King says first, Kingian nonviolence is first try to invite the parties to a dialogue. If they don't, then you take the nonviolent direct action, sitting at the lunch counter, stirring up demonstrations. But then you end with always the intention is to bring it into a dialogue at the end, and to see the humanity of the other people too.
Mm-hmm. So you're really concerned about this problem from people unwilling to talk to each other, and you remind of the tradition of nonviolent resistance, which sees it as a way to overcome this avoidance, just by doing sittings and just to try to force people to get into contact.
Yeah, I feel heard. Well, it's doing those to bring people into sort of a conflict and then bring them into a dialogue finally. Yeah. So I feel heard with that. Uh-oh, did you just freeze? Oh, you're there. Okay.
I'm here. Yeah, I'd like to talk to James. I think it's really a problem when people are not. I think what I see common with you, James, and Ray Taylor is that I somehow believe you have the tendency to not be really connected on a feeling and needs level. So I never, if you're writing something, I never have read anything from you or from Ray Taylor where you talk about your feelings and needs, which are central at the moment.
Yes, you see a problem that I don't talk about feelings and needs, my feelings experience, and what needs I have. And you see that as problematic. You see Ray Taylor doing the same thing.
And I mean, there's this saying, you can never get enough of what you don't need. And I really believe that some addictions can happen, and I think there can be some addictions to conflict. And I think that's problematic because I think conflict can being part of a conflict in this, I mean, it's this drama triangle, which I always mention, is this triangle between perpetrator, victim, and persecutor. And I think what I observe, that people which aren't able or willing to connect to themselves on a feelings and need label, they're often addicts of this drama triangle.
So you're referencing a triangle of victim, persecutor, and then maybe a third. And there is, you believe that people who don't connect to their feelings then fall into this dynamic.
Yeah, I think it's like, the third role has been the rescuer. So it's a triangle. It's always, I think the good thing is to join this drama triangle, because it gives a feeling of being close to someone. And I think the benefit from it is that if you join this triangle and this drama addiction, you can get close to people which just joining the drama, joining the conflict.
So people are attracted to the roles in this drama triangle because it gives a sense of closeness, to be close to people when the drama flares up, and then it can become like an addiction to conflict.
But I think it's not the real thing, because I think there's a much more efficient and much more healthier way to be close to each other if we're just present with our vulnerability, with in the here and now, with how we are feeling and what we are needing right at the moment.
You don't think that being in that drama triangle is the real connection to a person? The real connection to someone happens at a deeper level when we're connected to our own feelings in the present, which helps us connect to our feelings.
And right at the moment, I really feel some sadness coming around. And I think also a feeling of fear, helplessness. And I think when I talk about this topic, I really feel lonesome, alone, and really longing for a deep level of connection.
Yeah, when you talk about this topic, you connect to a deep, real, heavy sadness about wanting this kind of genuine, meaningful, feelings-based connection with people.
That was time too. So.
Did I hear you?
Yeah.
Okay. Edwin, would you listen to me, please?
Listening. Yeah,
I do agree with Adrian. It's essential to connect to our feelings. I'm surprised to hear, I don't know, I guess Adrian doesn't see where I write mostly, but I talk about feelings so much that I'm constantly told to stop talking about feelings. And I love it when I'm invited to connect to my feelings in the present.
So you agree that feelings are important, and you do it, and you in maybe Adrian hasn't seen it, where you talk a lot about your feelings and you value that.
Yeah. And I also, that triangle that he described, I have a different way of conceptualizing it, but it's really just a superficial difference. That is very problematic. Those three roles that he mentioned do block us from connecting to our feelings, without a doubt.
Yeah, so with the drama triangle, you agree that that kind of dynamic blocks people from their feelings.
Yeah. It's a small quibble, but I would be careful about telling people that they're addicted to conflict just for the same reasons that telling someone they're addicted to anything is not usually helpful. People, you know, whether it's an addiction to cigarettes or conflict, people, you know, do the best that they can to manage their feelings and their relationships.
So you don't find it really helpful to tell people they're addicted to something, they're just doing so the best they can.
Yeah. I've been kicked out of a lot of groups being accused of having a preoccupation with conflict. And it's never been helpful. I didn't find that to be helpful at all.
Mm-hmm. So people are actually saying that you like conflict or preoccupied with conflict, and you didn't find that helpful.
Yeah, I think it's a misunderstanding. Often there's a misinterpretation of what I do. We're talking about avoidance, and I engage. And by engaging, people who have the avoidance tendency interpret my engagement with it as wanting the conflict. So they interpret ignoring it as the best way to deal with it. And I disagree. Actually, I think a way to deal and dissolve the conflict is to engage with it. But it's the interpretation is that I want it, and in fact that I'm creating it, that I'm creating it. And of course, to people who are avoiding it, it does seem like I'm creating it out of thin air when I engage with what is there already.
Mm-hmm. So you're seeing, maybe you're seeing sort of this avoidance that people are doing. You're engaging with that avoidance, and then it seems to people that you're creating conflict because you're engaging.
Yeah, I'm not engaging the avoidance. I'm engaging the subject which is being avoided.
Oh, okay. So there's these subjects that are being avoided, and then you're engaging in those subjects, and then people see that as creating conflict because there's these subjects are just being avoided, and that
Right.
makes it look like there's you're creating conflict. You're just
Right.
addressing stuff that's already there.
I mean, it's comical. I don't have the ability to create all that conflict. It's just that it's already there, exactly. And so, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just a kind of dynamic where it just doesn't work to tell someone else, you be empathic. Like it only works when we find the space, create the space inside of ourselves to be empathic. And I think it's the same with other things too. It doesn't really work to say, you show up, you engage conflict. Then that is taking on the powerless role in the drama triangle, because if I need to wait for you to do it, then I put myself in the victim powerless role.
Mm-hmm. So you don't see it as constructive. Tell other people you should do this, you should do that, because then you're sort of doing this victim perpetrator powerless role. Instead, it's maybe just share what's going on for you instead of telling other people to do something.
Yeah.
And that was the time too.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll speak back to you then.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, it's this sort of dynamic of speaking about felt experiences versus, I don't know, being critical. I'm just kind of thinking about that. I mean, this whole dynamic. I sense the, you know, when I say, let's have an empathic dialogue in NVC-A, I mean, you just feel the walls go up. And like, is it like with Martin Luther King that you just keep going into the wall, keep, you know, kind of escalating it and just not let go, you know, is an approach. So I just kind of wonder about that.
Yeah, so you're thinking about the two, this the felt experience versus engaging with the issue or topic, and then about the specific group, the NVCA group. You can feel in the air the walls come up as you bring and mention the conflicts that are there, and you wonder, is it in alignment with the civil rights ideology, philosophy of engaging nonviolently, to just simply go to the wall, speak to the wall, speak it into that space.
And keep, pushing the wall, shaking the wall, you know, criticizing the wall, you know, just you know, just not let up is an approach. And it can be that initially it seems very disruptive, but then it also kind of gets people's attention, and then there's a phase after that, just like civil rights. I mean, people are getting beaten up, they're actually getting killed. You know, like lunch counters, people were being, you know, beaten up. But afterwards, kind of change did happen. It wasn't until there was sort of this conflict. And you're always saying, let's have an empathic dialogue, right? It's like we could have started this to begin with an empathic dialogue and we would have avoided all of this. So, you know, it's sort of how to sort of approach that. And just saying, oh, we have to be real nice and kind of be just, you know, please, can we have some empathy in the world, you know, and if you don't want to, that's okay, you know, kind of thing. So instead of shaking people, let's have this. So I don't know, it's like, I'm looking for the strategies myself, and I'm sort of for an assertive, you know, pushing for this.
Yeah, you're exploring the different possible ways to ask for an empathic culture. And you have your doubts about being really timid about it. You want a more of an assertive approach to raise and invite people in and say, this is really important. If we had just started with an empathic dialogue, all of this would not be, you know, necessary, what's happening right now.
Yeah, so I am looking at that, the assertiveness and how to do it in, you know, in a relatively empathic way or an empathic way. So yeah, it's a bit of a struggle, but I don't see anything happening otherwise. It's like, you know, we'd still be in the same civil rights situation unless people had sat at the lunch counters and demonstrated, and you know, it's like nothing happens because everybody just sticks with the status quo.
Yeah, so you're still exploring. You can see that without the more assertive approaches of the civil rights movement, nothing would have happened because people just tend to stay wedded to the status quo. And so you see it.
There's another piece it came to me, is that the problem with the civil rights is that it wasn't like, let's create a culture of empathy, right? It was like, hey, we want our rights, we're going for my rights, kind of. And I see that with NVC, kind of this individualistic, it's, you know, get me and mine, versus a vision of our culture, and that we need to transform the larger culture. So that's kind of where my hope is, you know, I don't want just me being all empathic and that's all good and well, but, you know, we really need a culture, this cultural shift, because we're all part of this culture. So it's sort of a way of seeing the world. You see it just in this individualistic, we're going to have all these individuals, like NVC seems very individualistic, versus that, hey, we're actually in this shared culture, and are we going to kind of shift the dynamics of this, you know, this relationship that we're in?
so criticism that you have of the civil rights movement is that maybe it was a little too focused on individual rights, and you think that that's also a problem in NVC community, people wanting to get theirs. They develop their empathy, or they get empathy for themselves, and you want more of a larger global systemic cultural shift towards empathy for everyone.
I mean, individual is part of it, but there is the other larger vision. That relationship is part of it too.
The relationship of the individual to the whole is integral.
I feel heard.
Adrian, would you listen to me, please?
Yes, I know.
So for me, it's real important to do the best I can imperfectly, not perfectly, to practice what I am saying has value. And part of that is addressing the conflicts or disconnections in the relationships and groups that I am in, rather than in other spaces that I'm not in. And one of those has been the conflict I've had with some of the trainers in the Building a Culture of Empathy groups who have demonized me and not been willing to have an empathy circle with me about it. I started a series after I was excluded from the training, the empathy circle training, facilitator training, and the trainers who do it have not been willing to talk with me in an empathy circle. And to Edwin's credit, he has not excluded me, but I see this as a real problem.
So for you, it's a really a big value to address the conflicts which are in a system, and you try to do it whenever you are in a system, that you try to do the best as possible that conflicts which are happening it's talking about, and you see a great value in that, because you see because you're really convinced of the beauty of conflict. And you struggled a lot with culture of empathy training, where people started to demonize you. I believe they started.
Excuse me. Sorry, I didn't talk about the beauty of conflict. I don't say that conflict is necessarily beautiful, but I do see the value in engaging with reality.
It's really important for you that we engage with reality, and we can only,
yes.
You see addressing conflict whenever it arises as
yes.
the way to
yes.
reality.
I have, I share Edwin's view about being assertive, but not really being destructive. And so I don't want to bully people to show up to an empathy circle who don't want to come. But I really want to then put that energy back into what I'm doing. And so one of the things I've been doing is I have this daily call for 90 minutes. And I tell people, I don't know where you are. I don't know why you're not available. I'm available every day. If people believe in dialogue and they want to tell me they hate me, they want to tell me I'm doing something wrong, whatever they want, I am available to listen to that. And I just, I've been publishing that information in different places. And for me, it's not to embarrass people and say, haha, you're not available and you can't show up. But I am I'm putting all of the energy into me being assertive and proactive to say, I want to be available I want other people to be available for dialogue. So I'm going to do what's in my power, which is to be available for dialogue. And I'm wondering, will people do that at any, will people commit and say, I'll be available for dialogue once a year, once a year at least, I will have this time and place that I set up where if you want to talk to me, I'm there. Because there are people I've been trying to talk to for 3 years and they say they're not available. And so this is something that I'm just trying to institute as a practice of availability for dialogue.
You really try to be a role model about availability, and you really, you really believe if there was a conflict around, it's really important to be available for those persons people are in conflict with, and even it's one time in a year, and you don't want to put pressure on anything. I think you just want to hold the value of being available for conflict.
Yes, thank you. I feel heard.
Yeah, I think at the moment
Who are you speaking to?
What?
Who are you talking to?
Edwin.
Listening.
James told about this, that people demonize him, but they refuse to be available for a conflict. And when I listen to that, it makes me really sad.
Mm-hmm. So when you're hearing James talk about, that people are demonizing him, but they're not open for dialogue, we just feel a real sadness around that.
And I think it's this whole, it shows this really, really negative power of enemy images, because enemy images can have such a big power about people that they're not available to talk to each other anymore.
Mm-hmm. So it's sort of that feeling that comes out of enemy images. You see someone as an enemy, and then you just make yourself unavailable to talk with them.
Yeah, people can be so afraid of people they've never met. I think that's the core energy of racism. It's usually, or it's the core, also the whole fear people had for black people, for also white people. This whole, I think this whole division by fear, and also this control over people by making them afraid of others.
Yeah, so really seeing the feeling of fear, how that really blocks sort of connection and kind of creates this sense of that people can go into control instead of maybe connection. And it's just that's sort of based on enemy images or just not knowing people, and it can happen between anyone, black, white, any sort of races.
And I work mainly with homeless people and severely drug addict people, and also with people which are victims of human trafficking, and I think that's a really a technique of manipulation used that perpetrators tell their victims, like, hey, don't trust anybody. All those people are bad. They're not interested about you. They just want to exploit you. Don't trust them. I'm the only one. That's the absurdity, but it's effective. Many pimps can convince their prostitutes that they are the only one which love them, and all the other people are exploitative and bad.
So you're working with homeless, people dealing with drug addiction, sexual violence, and you're noticing that it's sort of creating fear in people that kind of creates a sense you can control them. You kind of tell, hey, everybody's to be fearful of everyone out there, and then that kind of gives somebody a sense of control over that person who's in fear.
And I think it's one of these mechanisms is also that fear prevents those people of showing themselves as vulnerable to others.
And it's that fear that they can reveal themselves who they are. Is if you're afraid, you don't share who you are. You didn't have that vulnerability.
And this comes, I mean, the result is somehow a self-fulfilling prophecy. People don't show themselves vulnerable anymore to anyone. They just close up. They say, oh no, I don't need anything. I'm fine. Leave me alone. And that really makes them, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because people can't say anymore that they need support. They don't get any.
Yeah, so when you sort of withdraw, say, I don't trust you, you also don't get any support, then it just becomes a self-fulfilling experience that you just go into fear and disconnection. And that was the time too. So, yeah, I'll speak to James.
Yes, listening.
Yeah, the dynamics of fear is central, to the thing you do in a cult. You get people afraid of everyone else, and then they stay in the cult. And one of the things you want to do is not have them talk to their family, don't talk to. So it's actually the dialogue that's kind of shut down, and that's why dialogue is so important, because it kind of gets you out of that type of cultish mindset.
Yeah, so cults use fear as a way to isolate people, and the fear inculcates essentially it makes it so that people don't have dialogues with their family or friends, and then they are isolated, and in a vicious circle they have more fear.
In one of the empathy cafes, I laid out the 4 principles of a culture of empathy, and it is about reaching out to as wide a variety of people as possible empathically. It's if there's a conflict, you are willing to engage in that conflict empathically and be willing to take the first step in empathizing. So if there's a conflict, whatever, that you're willing to take the first step in empathizing, to invite, hopefully to bring people into an empathic dialogue.
So you emphasize that a culture of empathy, one of the qualities is that we reach out to as wide of an audience as possible to extend an empathic ear.
Yeah, and be in relationship, like really, how do we really expand as wide a variety of people as possible to reach out and, be it any social group, the more we can expand for me, it feels good. I spent 10 years traveling around the world, in all kinds of cultures, and it was really a lot of fun to connect with all these different cultures and people. And I think that's what kind of led to, sort of a value of empathy. And so I think making a conscious effort of sort of reaching out is important.
You spent time traveling all around the world, and so you find it rewarding to be exposed and to interact and engage with as wide, a diversity of people as possible.
And that Bill doesn't want to talk to you. As a trainer, it's like, I don't agree with that. I say, go talk to James. It's like, I can't force anybody. I talk about the principles, and my hope is that, people get really triggered and upset, that, hopefully they'll eventually come to the table, and I keep trying to encourage it. So I totally, get what you're saying around that.
Yeah, Bill won't talk to me. And as a lead trainer, you think that's problematic, but you can't force people to talk. And all you can do is you talk about the principles, and then hope maybe at some point, some trigger, maybe of pain or something, people decide to come to the table.
Yeah. And Lou, he's glad to talk to you. He enjoys talking to you. I think he likes you. So he's the other trainer. So I mean, everybody's kind of different. I think you'd have, if there's a real issue, he's willing to dialogue. And I know that they did have a call with you where they did talk with you, but I would have done it recorded. I would have done it in an empathy circle format. And so I mentioned that to them too. I said, why wasn't this recorded? Why didn't you record that discussion? And, they said, well, we used loose empathy circle process, but I would have been a bit more strict in terms of the process.
So Lou, the other lead trainer for the facilitator training, is willing to talk to me, likes talking to me, and could be available to talk if it's necessary, if something comes up. That we did have a conversation, the three of us, informally, but you would have liked it to have been recorded. You asked them, why wasn't it recorded? And they said, well, we did it loose. And you would have liked them to stick to the norms that have been used for the empathy circle, a little closer.
Yeah. So I'm a little disappointed. It was a big issue in our group, and I had to sort of, navigate it, but I learned a lot, and kind of came down, got really clear on, my position, which is just talk to the people, just talk to James. And I've been talking at first, I thought, oh, James is like just trying to create conflict, but I've really grown to appreciate and value, feel really connected, with you. So so I think that's what the dialogue leads to, is you just build trust and connection and friendship. And
it was an issue for the whole group, for you and for the whole group. And at first you were kind of annoyed, thinking like James is just trying to create problems. And then over time, you've really come to appreciate, you've learned from the whole experience, and you've come to appreciate our relationship and the things you've learned from having these dialogues.
Yeah. And I guess the last part was just that you're so willing to dialogue. I mean, it's like you show up. I mean, you will show up and you'll be on time. I mean, you'll follow the, the agreements, and yeah, I really appreciate it. It's great. I appreciate the connection. Somehow I just feel a lot of, just how we're looking at the world, there is a lot of, commonality there, sort of, yeah.
You're appreciating the connection and the common ground that we've discovered, created about empathy and about the approach that we'd like to take to this whole, to the world, and to the whole issue of all the mess.
Yeah, I feel heard. Good.
All right. Adrian, would you listen to me?
Yes.
Yeah, I've learned a lot too. I've been learning a lot in the empathy circles, in my relationships with Edwin, in the joining game. Yeah, learning and appreciating the opportunities to learn and develop and discover relationships that matter and have a lot of value to me. Learning about myself, learning about what matters to me.
Yeah. So you really appreciate these empathy circles because you learn a lot from them about yourself also.
Yeah. Most of the work I'm doing is with the joining game, but I am doing this weekly empathy circle on exclusion on Saturdays. And we spent the time last Saturday, and I hope Edwin has a chance to watch it, discussing the empathy circle structure and how to break it, and not to break it out of any kind of malice, but to really to understand it. And one example that I was using was that in the psychological literature on exclusion, there's a common test that they do, which is 3 people, 2 people are Confederates, they pass the ball around, and then 2 people, they just pass the ball back and forth to each other, and inevitably the third person begins to feel excluded and angry. And I was remarking at how similar in an empathy circle like this with 3 people, it could easily, some of that same dynamic could come up, where if Adrian and I wanted to just keep passing back and forth to each other, we could exclude Edwin. And inside the empathy circle structure, he would have no way to break out and say like, hey, I want to take a turn now, and so it's just, it's kind of like exploring subtler and subtler levels of what exclusion might look like, or what kind of structures or agreements do we need in place to prevent, to create these spaces that we want to have. And I see all of that as valuable learning to just like continue to peel back the layers of the onion about what is really at the core of what we're doing. The empathy circle structure is kind of at the superficial level, but and it's useful, but at the core there are these principles, and that's why I like the focus of principles and values that has come up. Those values are what give us direction. And Edwin started the call talking about the purpose and intention for the call, and I think that that's valuable. I share the values and intentions that he stated. I do the same thing on my calls, and I usually say it just in a little different language, but I think the values are the same, which is my intention is to find the common ground, the areas of common ground that we can meet and work together and build on. And when we can't, we find a way to integrate the different grounds that we have that come up. That's my way of talking about the values and intentions. And it has been serving me very well.
Okay, so
you don't have to get everything, just the gist is fine for me.
Yeah, you have this weekly call on exclusion, and what I understand from here, you're really try to understand the mechanism on inclusion of everything. How can we be more inclusive on a group level? And you see some benefits on focusing on values that we have.
Yeah, and just to finish up, right? So Edwin talked about traveling and being, wanting to welcome a wider and wider diversity of people and engage with more people. And I totally share that. But my understanding of the value of finding ways to effectively integrate all of these conflicts or differences that we have is that we achieve a space which is more and more tolerant for these differences in people and in ways of thinking. And that for me is like it's a moral, ethical value to be more tolerant of differences.
you see really, I believe your values are really to acknowledge diversity on a really radical way, so that we really see the benefit of honoring diversity and being curious about people which are other than ourselves.
Yes.
Just know we have 10 minutes left, so 2 rounds.
Yeah, I think I'm a bit confused because there are many topics being spoken about, and many.
Speaking to.
Who are you speaking to?
Sorry, to Edwin.
Okay, listening.
I'm a bit confused because there are many different conflicts being addressed, and I think this makes me feel a bit overwhelmed.
Okay, so there's a lot of different conflicts that we're talking about here, and it creates some confusion and feeling of overwhelm.
I think what I really...
Maybe you would like a bit more focus, would like more focus or something.
I think we all have this vision how we can live together in harmony, each and everyone.
So you kind of see that everyone has their own vision of living in harmony with everyone.
I think this is living as a community together in harmony. I think this is such a dream which every human being on this planet is sharing. I think that's really what we all want.
Yes, there's maybe a need or a desire for this feeling of harmony, and you really see that maybe really everybody would like that.
And I think there are many different thoughts about how we come to this place.
And kind of everyone has their own ideas of how to create that or come to that place, yeah, of harmony.
And I think from my experience, one of the key questions or one of the key difficulties really this tolerance paradoxon. And so I think that's also why I love Marshall Rosenberg's work, because he gives much clarity about these soft notions of violence.
So you're really, thinking about that tolerance paradox, and something you're trying to figure out, and that you really appreciate that Marshall Rosenberg in his approach is maybe some way of sort of addressing that tolerance paradox.
And I really believe it's really powerful to focus on what we all have in common, and we all have the same feelings and needs.
So relating to that commonality, that if we can see that those common feelings and needs that we have, that is, yeah, positive way forward.
And for me, it's really a magical experience being able to connect with other peoples which are really coming close or coming into these connections on the feeling and needs level.
So you find that it's like this magical feeling that when you can really connect with others, with feelings and needs, it just has a really magical feeling to it.
And I think my core, and what really makes me afraid, for me, political correctness or wokeness culture has just destroyed this heritage of Marshall Rosenberg.
So the sort of the mindset of wokeness destroys that approach of Marshall Rosenberg's about feelings and needs and finding that commonality.
And for me, I think inside NVC and inside XR, NVCA and XR, it's the same stuff. That those are both groups which say they commit themselves to NVC, nonviolence.
Mm-hmm. So both of those groups are saying, oh yeah, we're committing ourselves to nonviolence, but sounds like you're seeing some problems there, some inconsistencies.
Yeah, it's just people. For me, people have taken over these groups, which just follow the wokeness narrative, the black or white thinking of right-wing people are bad. Left-wing, what's right-wing is good, what's left-wing is bad, with mixing this totally up. And it's frightening how that works.
So you just see how this good, bad, right, wrong thinking is kind of shutting down the more feelings and needs and that connection, and it's scary to see how that dynamic is playing out. Okay. I'll speak back to you, Adrian. Yeah, we have been talking about a lot of different topics, but somehow everything always seems to overlap for me. So I just, yeah.
Yes, you see different topics, but you see some kind of overlapping structure. Yeah.
And yeah, I see the issues with the kind of the lack of empathy on the different political spheres, and I guess it's with the tolerance paradox, somehow, for me, it's like what the question would be is how to bring empathy into that. It's like to stand for empathy, mutual empathy. So I'm not so big on tolerance as I am for empathy. I think that empathy kind of goes beyond tolerance, that it's, and then how to sort of advocate for that within this conflict, or this power over, or whatever you want to call it, dynamics. Like, how do we kind of address that? And it does seem to be to kind of listen to the sides, listen to both sides, listen to all the sides. There's multiple sides, and then to try to bring them into a dialogue like we're doing here. I mean, I see this is the kind of the space of what I'm trying to create. So I feel pretty good. You say, hey, we're actually the means and the end, right? We're doing the means and the end right now. So.
How I understand you see it as a really effective way to have nonviolent communities, just to provide them with empathy, in which you see these circles as an effective way just to bring more empathy in the system. Yeah,
and this goes before feelings and needs. It's great. It would deepen the dialogue as we go into the feelings and the desires and the needs, the feelings that we want. But you don't have to. It's like, most people aren't, it's like, but just being able to listen to each other is like a good first step. It's like, you don't have to talk about feelings and needs, but just hear me out and I will hear you out. And it does seem that, over time, we would sink deeper into those. So I guess my goal is to teach everyone how to do empathic listening and empathy circle, spread it as widely as possible, and to sort of confront these forces that are out there, avoidance, power over, whatever, with empathy. How do we really kind of create a movement for this?
So you believe it's really magical if we just start to listen to each other, and there's no need to talk about feelings or needs all the time, but we can just talk about, as we want, but the magic of just listening to each other has a really important power, which you wish more to spread it.
Yeah, the feelings will arise. As people develop trust, they start sharing their feelings, and the trust comes just from knowing that you have space to share where you are and that you will be heard. And then, you know, slowly that trust builds and people do start sharing their feelings and their, you know, hopes and vision, you know, for their lives, the feelings that they would want. So I guess, yeah. So it's the path. I think this is the path towards that.
Yeah, you really believe if we just start to listen to each other and practice that we will automatically come to a needs and feelings level, and it will just happen naturally.
Yeah, and the question is, how do we really transform the society? I mean, I want to take our empathy tents and set up in front of the White House, and, you know, call on James. He's not too far from there. We'll go and we'll, you know, demand that Joe Biden or whoever, you know, take part in an empathy circle. You know, just I think we need to do something to kind of get out there into the national discussion, you know, with empathy. So this is good training here for us. You can do it in the parliament in Switzerland too, Adrian.
Yeah, you believe it's really important that we go to the people, we go to society, that we don't wait society to come to us, but that we actively go to the society to provide that with them with this technique and to get kind of starting to get addicted to it.
Yeah, and I don't think it is a technique, but it's also a mindset. So I want to just be sure that that's heard, that it is a sort of a way of being. It's the deeper values that we're representing here, you know, that James was mentioning.
Yeah, it's not only about the technique. I think it's really this mindset of trusting in the power of listening to each other.
Yeah,
and the transformative power of that.
So I feel fully heard, and that's our time too. So maybe we could just each do a short summary or kind of a wrap up before we close. And I can start. I appreciate both of you showing up, because I think there's something important about you are the ones that showed up. There's 2,000 or 3,000 people in these groups, and it's kind of us who shows up to actually do empathic listening. So I don't know, it just seems to say something to me that seems like we're doing what we're talking about. So that's me. I don't know if anybody else, anyone else?
Yeah, I will close by saying that I'm really grateful for being invited. And I know that there are a lot of topics that kind of come up perennially, but I feel I feel like with each time we return, there is a deepening understanding I'm developing about what the issues are and where I want to put my energy, and that's invaluable. So thanks to both of you, and I hope that I hope this series or continues in some way. I believe it will, and I'm looking forward to where it goes.
Yeah, and I just want to tell my appreciation for the work of Edwin Rutsch. I think it's really, I mean, from the beginning that Edwin goes out to protests and is doing this work on the front line. It's funny, in the NVC A group, there's been a topic which are the great facilitators of the putting on the followers of Marshall Rosenberg. And for me, I think this empathy circles and this going on the streets and doing that is for me really something which is new and which I really appreciate now outside of what was Marshall Rosenberg is doing, and I really hope that many people will do that and have the courage to encourage people listening to each other, especially at these places where people are not listening to each other, because I think I'm really afraid that in the States the whole conflicts will lead to a civil war, and I think people really have to be aware that we can maybe the alternative to shooting each other is just to talking to each other. And I think we really should ask ourselves, okay, it takes courage to start to each other, but maybe it's really that what can prevent a war happening. And I think it's worth having the courage to talk to each other and be available to anyone.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for that. And I'll just put a quick plug here in for Carolina is taking the Empathy Tent to Warsaw this weekend to a festival, an environmental festival. So they'll be doing empathic listening, empathy circles, big signs, empathy tent in Polish. So, you know, we can take it all over the world. So, okay, well, great. It was great to see you both, and look forward to doing the next step. And I'll turn off the we want to take our intention. I want to take my intention, you know, out to the rest of the world. So that's turning it off. The circle is closed. All righty. See you.
Thank you, Edwin. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Jay.